What's up, guys? It's another week and another video, and this week, fortunately, nothing important broke, so instead of working on anything, we're going to be talking about something. Okay, I had a suggestion from a viewer in a previous video that I should respond to Scotty Kilmer's whether or not you should warm up your car video. And I watched it and he made some good points and he completely missed some points. So I did a little research and I decided rather than doing just a direct response video, I would instead try to conclusively put this debate to bed. I do think that part of the confusion is the fact that people are looking at this from multiple standpoints and it's creating some confusion. So what I've done is I've broken this down into two questions. One is, can I warm up my car before I drive it? The other is, should I warm up my car before I drive it? So the first one, can you warm up your car before you drive it somewhere? I would say the short answer to that is yes. Whether or not those conditions are ideal, there are a lot of things put into cars specifically to take care of less than ideal situations. Engineers have to test for, the lowest common denominator. They have to imagine that the people driving their cars are not going to know what they're doing. They're going to have to imagine that this car be put into a lot of situations that are less than ideal. So if you just jump into a stone cold car and drive away, it's not going to blow up. Alternatively, if you jump in a car after it's been idling for 30 minutes and drive away, it's not going to blow up. So I think if you look at this from a standpoint of, the soccer mom that's taking their kids to soccer or school or whatever, and the car's going to be putting along at less than 4,000 RPMs anyway and not driven very hard and all that, then it really doesn't matter. Just drive it however you want. If it's 20 below outside and you're getting ready to bring children to school and you don't want them to ride halfway to school in 20 below, then absolutely warm the car up till it's hot. You're not going to blow anything up. Whether or not you affect long-term engine wear is a lot less important at that point than the children you're trying to keep warm. So we're going to take the can I completely out of the situation. If it's just, hey, I'm an average car driver and I don't push my car hard, and can I do whatever I want? Fine, that I don't care. Okay, the next question. Should you warm up your car? Now, Scotty makes a few points, which I'm going to kind of touch on here. But yes, it used to be that cars had to warm up before you drove them on purpose because carbureted cars, which had very limited control over the air-fuel ratio they created, had to warm up before they would run correctly. The reason for this is cold fuel and cold air don't mix as well. And as anyone who knows anything about cars knows, it's not as simple as you put any random amount of fuel with any random amount of air and then it burns. That's not how engines work. The air-fuel ratio needs to be a specific amount, and it also needs to change based on things like temperature. And the reason why, since cold air and cold fuel don't mix and don't atomize the fuel as well, it requires more fuel for enough of it to be in the vapor form and in the combustion chamber on time to create the amount of power it needs to run the engine. Carbureted cars had a very hard time doing this because carbureted cars don't have much ability to vary that for specific circumstances. So instead, they had what was called a choke, which would essentially block off part of the air coming into the carburetor to richen up the mixture by creating less air and therefore more fuel. And they would do that and idle at a higher RPM to get past that initial point there where the fuel is cold and the air is cold and they don't mix well. And okay, so that's what that is. Obviously, fuel injected cars have worlds more ability to handle this problem than carbureted cars do. Fuel injected cars have intake air charge temperature sensors. They have almost infinitely variable amounts of fuel within the size of the injector that can be added or subtracted. They have a computer sitting in there looking at sensory outputs to determine whether or not the air-fuel mixture is correct and what it needs to do to change them. So when they're cold, the computer is just going to automatically richen the mixture. So you don't need a mechanical thing like a choke to make that happen. That's what he's pointing out in the video there, that it kind of removes that. So yes, fuel injection does solve the air-fuel mixture problem that was part of why cars used to be warmed up. But there's more to the situation than that. The other side of it is oils, and he mentions that too. Newer oils are thinner than older oils were. Full synthetics flow better than conventionals do. We now have cars that come out from the factory with 0W20, which almost flows like water. First of all, there are still a lot of cars on the road running much thicker oil than that, so I don't know that that's necessarily by itself justification. But the other end to that is that the oil needs to get into the motor, needs to get where it needs to be, and lubricate everything. But in addition to your typical lubrication, on the bearings on the crankshaft, the oil creates a sheen, like a layer between the bearing itself and the crankshaft. And that's actually what the crank is meant to ride on, not on the bearing. It's not supposed to be metal to metal. It's that little sheen of oil that separates the two that keeps them from wearing against each other. So you have two different forces there. You have oil pushing its way into that space. And then you have the force of the piston coming down, trying to squeeze the oil out of that space. So the two there, that makes a difference. When it's colder and the oil is having a hard time getting to that position, then it is possible that the oil, the pressure from the cylinders pushing down, is squeezing the oil out faster than the oil's getting back in, which could cause metal-to-metal contact, which is bad. However, most newer, more modern oils and most modern engines allow for oil to get to these places fairly quickly. It's not instantaneous. When you crank the car, you don't just immediately have oil everywhere that you need it to be. And depending on what kind of filter you're using, and depending on the oiling system that engine has, it may take longer or it may take less time for that to be achieved. That aside, the other thing which he completely glosses over and doesn't mention at all is thermal expansion. Engines are built from metal, mostly. I mean, nowadays it's plastic too. It's a lot of different things. But the main portion of an engine is comprised of more than one kind of metal. You may have an aluminum block. You may have an iron block. You may have an aluminum head. You may have an iron head. The rings might be made out of different material. The pistons made out of different materials. The rods, the cylinder walls, everything is different metals. All these metals expand and contract at different rates. Now, when the engineers design the engines, they have to take this into consideration. The way the engines are designed is based on where they end up, not where they start. So when an engine is very cold, especially if you're in, say, one of the northern states, Canada, somewhere that's very, very cold, those metals are going to contract quite a bit compared to what they would be when they're at operating temperature. Now, the reason piston rings have gaps in them is because they have to, because when they expand, they fill that space up. Now that means when they're cold, that gap is open. The entire engine essentially is built the same way. When it's very cold, there are gaps places. There are things that are not the size that they're supposed to be when you're regular driving. Therefore, from a performance car standpoint, and this doesn't necessarily apply so much to, once again, the soccer mom and her Toyota Sienna. But if you have, let's say, an Evo or any performance car, let's say you have a Corvette or whatever, and you're taking it out to beat on it. I mean, you're taking it out to drive it. You're not putting around taking kids to school. You know, you're actually out to drive and push this engine as hard as you can. If you fire it right up, when it first starts, there are, like I said, there are gaps in the piston rings that shouldn't be there. The pistons are not as tight to the walls as they should be. There is a lot of thermal expansion that's going to occur, and the engine is designed for that. So is it a good idea to jump in one of these cars and take off and beat the hell out of it? Absolutely not. This can cause extra wear because it allows things to move into positions they're not supposed to be in. This can allow things like additional blow-by, which can pressurize the crankcase. There's a lot of things that it can cause. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to let a car idle for an hour and a half before you go drive it. Because for the one side, engines actually at idle don't warm up as fast as they do when they're actually doing something. So my suggestion there would be you do need to let it idle a little bit before driving, but then you should drive it a little, because driving it a little, you're going to get it up to temperature faster. So if you jump in a cold car and you take off, you're not only driving a car that may or may not have enough oil in the places that it needs to be, you're also driving an engine that hasn't expanded yet and has gaps where there shouldn't be. It also is running on fuel maps with no way to second guess itself and make sure that the air-fuel ratios it's achieving are correct. And now, especially in a modified car or a performance vehicle, these are not things that you want to leave up in the air while you're driving. I would say, and to maybe try to sum all of this up, if you are an average soccer mom kind of driver, then just drive your car. I wouldn't worry about it that much. Obviously, it's more important that you pay attention to it doing anything wrong. Other than that, it's not that big of a deal. It's up to you. I don't care, whatever. If you are a performance enthusiast, if you have a car you're going to drive aggressively, then in those cases, my suggestion would be at least crank it and let it warm for 30 seconds to a minute before you try to move it. Then don't beat on it right away. It might be tempting to, but it's not good for it. Drive it a little bit. Let it come up to operating temperature. So as with every other major question, the answer isn't one way or the other. You don't have to warm your car up. You don't have to not warm your car up. You can do whatever you want. But if you're in one of the situations like I mentioned, like I think a lot of my viewers probably will be, then just remember, don't beat it until it's warm. That's about all I have to say about that, though. I may have missed something, I don't know. And if I did, leave me something down in the comments. I will revise and I will improve. Other than that, I've got some more stuff to film today. I have more videos coming out. I have 2 more bonuses I think are going to come out this week. A lot going on. Please remember to subscribe if you're new here, or if you've watched a couple videos and have not been sure. I promise the content will hopefully only get better from here. I am trying to grow, so all of that helps me. Please share the video, and I will catch you guys next week. Thank you.